Hello students, and welcome back to the lore of the Iron Kingdoms with me, Professor Caster. Today we are going to be going over specific Trollkin Warbeast. And more specifically, I believe we're going over the full-blood trolls, which are the trolls that are not quite dire, but bigger than the Trollkins. So we'll be going over all of those, including one of the newer Northkin variations that they like to use way up north in their settlements, or their creels, rather. But before we begin, thank you guys so much for showing up to class, and if you could, please like, subscribe, comment. That helps the channel grow, helps keep the big old algorithm going, and the upper staff enjoys that as well. And also sharing this content with your friends and fellow gamers does help greatly, so we always appreciate it. Also, a huge thank you to Privateerpress for letting us read their fantastic lore. Also, side note before we begin, we're actually breaking this course up for the Trollblood Warbeast into technically four major categories. First one is the full-blood trolls that we're about to read over. Then we'll be going over dire trolls, and then we'll be going over elemental trolls, so trolls that have a touch of elemental abilities. And then we'll be finishing off with all of the character warbeasts. So stick around for all of those. This will be fun in the next coming weeks. And without further ado, let's begin. Troll Axer. A Troll Axer is a monster of corded muscle capable of cleaving through a wall of men with a single blow of its massive axe. It is not unknown for one of these trolls to savor the taste of enemy's arm or leg in the midst of battle, even as the horrified victim bleeds out on the ground. Trolls are carnivorous humanoids that tower over the mightiest Trollkin. They are smarter than most people realize and have simple language that allows them to work effectively in groups. The cooperative arrangement between full-blood trolls and Trollkin dates back to just after the time of Mulgar, when the Trollkin made pacts with the trolls in an effort to harness their barely controlled destructive urges. In today's difficult times, chiefs and shamans throughout the Scarfell, the Gnarls, and the Thornwood rely heavily upon the old agreements to buttress their war efforts. Though wild trolls can fashion crude improvised weapons from a variety of materials, these trained to serve the Trollkin as axers are armed with a hefty oversized iron axe of tremendous destructive potential. The many Trollkin leaders who call upon Troll Axers to bolster their battle lines have found that the presence of just a few axers can make all the difference to a Trollkin army, as these hulking brutes are surprisingly effective at sowing panic and scattering enemy formations. And yes, a Trollkin that stands a grand total of 9 feet tall with an axe about the same size, they destroy most units pretty effectively. And I would say for the what's considered a light warbeast in this regard, they actually have the highest punch I have seen for any of the light warbeast in the Trollkin arsenal. So yeah, very dangerous, and their ability to just, thresher through people like they're just cutting down grain is very impressive and very useful for the trolls, and very terrifying for their enemies. So, but let's check out their Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes and see what they got. And as always, let's start with their stat line. So it appears they are a speed of 5, a mat of 7, so that's actually a little bit better than Mark 3. So their mat's gone up 1. Their defense is 12. The armor is still 17. There's still a Fury 3, Threshold 8 Warbeast. Looks like they have Headbutt and Trample. So that's always a very useful thing. Their abilities, they still have Regeneration because they still are a Warbeast of the Trollkin. So this guy can be forced to remove D3 damage points from itself. So that's a very, very great. Their weapon is still a great axe with the new mat 7, so they're going to hit a lot better. Still a range of 2, and still like power 14. They still have the Thresher special attack on them. So this model makes 1 melee attack against every model in its line of sight, and with the new Mark 4, every model in its line of sight, it's a 360 degrees, so this guy can, walk into an entire unit and hit everything around it. Now, if you have guys in that little radius that he's going to be swinging, he hits everybody in there, so look out for that. You want to have this guy way forward from your own units, or else he's going to accidentally, crush them. So look out for that. His animus includes, well, Rush. So target friendly faction Warbeast gains +2 speed and gains Pathfinder. And what I love about this Animus is it's a cost 2 Animus, so he can even cast it himself, but it's target friendly faction Warbeast. So this is a targeted spell, so he could cast this on other Warbeasts and stuff, or your warcaster or your warlock could cast this on other people in his unit as well, which those always create a way more interesting game rather than just an ability that he can gain himself or your warbeast, warlock can gain. So yeah, very useful, and I've been seeing a lot of that with the Trollkin in the recent reviews of their archived footage, so fantastic. But that is the Troll Axer, a very dangerous, and as I mentioned before, one of the heaviest hitters for the light Warbeast of the Trollkin, so always a look out for these guys. And if you are a Trollkin warlock looking to, field a couple of these guys, your money is well spent on these guys. So, but let's move on. Troll Bouncer. Many warlocks have favored the powerful and reliable troll bouncers for their fierce instinct to intercept enemies threatening any they consider kin. It is this trait above all that has allowed the bouncers to fight their way to a well-deserved prominence among the forces of the United Creels. Strapped into thick, heavy armor and holding a stout shield in front, a bouncer whirls a deadly spiked ball overhead, the whistling oversized chain heralding bone-shattering brutality. Heedless of their own survival, troll bouncers eagerly wade into battle among armored enemies, sending their signature weapon careening over the tops of their foes' shields to slam down with a sickening crunch. These solid warrior trolls are part of a long and valued tradition. For generations, full-blood trolls have formed strong attachments to the Trollkin who feed and fight alongside them. Some have demonstrated a particular loyalty and protectiveness, otherwise unusual in their species, prompting a number of Creels to select them for training to use a weapon and a shield. Trained troll bouncers gladly charge into harm's way, sometimes shouldering allies aside from taking attacks upon themselves. Trollkin Creels have long singled out such trolls to guard chieftains, shamans, and other important elders. With enemies of the Creels now closing in from every direction, the bouncers find their service in ever higher demand. And bouncers are very useful in protecting, well, not only leaders and elders of the Trollkin, as well as solos or a unit that they might be around, because these guys have a pretty substantially heavy armor value for a considerably light warbeast. So these guys are running an arm 19. So with that thick shield, these guys can take all sorts of damage or all sorts of hits and shrug off most range attacks, at all. So very useful to have. But let's check out their Mark III to Mark IV changes and see what we got. And as always, we will start with their stat line. And it appears their stat line is, they are a speed 5, of course, a mat 6, so they're not as heavily updated as the other one. Defense 12. Arm is 17 or a 19 if they're carrying their shield, which they will always be carrying their shield because they're Warbeasts and not Warjacks, so they can't lose arms. Or if they could, they just turn into it. Well, but we'll move on from that. They are a Fury 3, a Threshold 9. They have a Trample and Headbutt as the special abilities that come with their size. They have, their abilities include Regeneration, so they can be forced to heal a D3. So that helps, unless their spirit's gone, because, well, once your spirit's gone, you can't be forced, but they can keep healing themselves up every round. Their most useful ability is Shield Guard. And with Shield Guard, I'm just going to read the updated version of it, because I think the wording's just a little bit different, but we'll just read the updating. When a friendly model is directly hit by a non-spray range attack while within 3 inches of a model with Shield Guard, you can choose to have the model with Shield Guard be directly hit instead. That model is automatically hit and suffers all damage and effects. A model can use Shield Guard only once per round, and cannot use Shield Guard if it is incorporeal, knocked down, or stationary. Shield Guard can only be used once per turn, and as mentioned before, with their shields they gain a +2 to their armor, so it makes them even more invulnerable to most range attacks. Even a super powerful, like POW 16, still a -3 onto the damage for this guy. So yeah, you want him to be taking those hits too, because he still has 22 health points compared to, you know, all of your more squishy models. And on top of that, he has his melee weapon, but technically his shield's a melee weapon, so they are both a mat 6 range 1, POW 11 for his shield, and a POW 12 for his ball and chain, which is also a chain weapon, so it ignores shields of other models. So very, very useful there, especially if you're going up against shield walls. And then his animus is Earth's Blessing. The spellcaster cannot be pushed, knocked down, or made stationary, or moved by a slam. So this is a very useful if you're trying to protect, well, anybody around you. So, and it keeps this guy, if this guy uses it on himself, he can shield guard to his heart's content. Well, at least once he can, and he can't be slammed into his person that he's protecting. So, and then if you put this on your warcaster, you can keep them from being knocked down too. So, or warlock, so you can keep them being knocked down too. So he is still a very useful, still pretty much the exact same as he was in Mark 3 to Mark 4. Yeah. Very useful for anybody who needs that extra bit of protection, especially if you have a low armored troll or you are a low armored dude yourself. You want him to just take all the brunt. But let's move on. Troll Impaler. Pitching enormous spears with bone-crushing force, Impalers are the living ballistae of the trolls. Each carries a quiver of massive wooden and iron projectiles bearing only functional similarity to the puny twigs smaller races call spears. These savage missiles impact their targets with the force of a battering ram, obliterating men and knocking even the greatest beasts off their feet. Of the same troll species as the axe-wielding kin, Impalers are distinguished primarily by their training and armament. Since ancient times, some trolls have a predilection for ripping small trees off the ground and hurling them at the enemy. Trollkins have learned to capitalize on this tendency, selecting trolls with keen eyes and above average coordination for training as Impalers. As they fight alongside their Trollkin cousins, the powerful Impalers are equally deadly in close melee as they are at range. Impalers enjoy the same powers of regeneration and ravenous appetites as other full-blood trolls, and the Trollkins who tend these beasts have learned to keep them well fed, both to discourage them from turning on their allies in the chaos of battle, and to maintain the integrity of their exacting funeral rites for slain kin. These efforts do not always succeed, however, particularly with regard to trolls battered within an inch of death at the Warlock's command. Some Creels have reluctantly decided that a few missing bodies at the end of a battle are an unfortunate but acceptable price to pay for calling upon the power of trolls to safeguard their species. And yes, true full-blood trolls do eat, well, literally everything, including, you know, bodies that may be particularly trolly in nature. But that is something that you have to accept with every single Warbeast troll there is. So, but these guys, when they say the puny twig smaller races called spears, they're not kidding, because the things that they're throwing are about 2 to 3 inches in diameter just for the pole. That's not including the giant spearhead on the front of these things. And yeah, if you're hit by one of these, you're gonna hope it doesn't just go right through you, or else you're just gonna be launched like a little twig on the wind. So yeah, and for thrown weapons, I would say that these are, you know, better than some more modern firearms. So there's something to be said about old school spears when thrown by a beast that is way bigger than any human species. So, but let's read his Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes and see what we got. And as always, let's start with his stat line. So he is a speed 5, he is a mat 5, he is a rat 6, so he's a little better at throwing, which makes more sense. Defense 12, arm 17, which is kind of heavy arm for a guy that's usually just throwing spears. He is still a Fury 3, still a Threshold 9. And he has the ability to trample, headbutt, and he has dual attack, which means that he can not only run in and, you know, kill something with his battle spear, but then he can chuck it afterwards. So having that ability is super useful. His abilities in Mark 4 He still has regeneration D3, so he can be forced to regenerate. And he still has set defense, so models suffer a -2 to charge attack and slam attack rolls against this model. One of the fun things that they've removed from him is assault, just because with the new dual attack kind of, you know, everywhere, assault doesn't really have anything to do with this anymore. So, and it gives him more capability, so he doesn't have to, like, you know, assault the guy that he's charging. He can charge one guy and then throw his spear at another. Gives him a little bit more play on that one, especially since the power of his spear is a POW 13, so that is still a pretty dang decent amount of damage, especially on a charge roll. One of the other ones they removed from him is follow-up. So when this model slams an enemy, immediately after the slam is resolved, the model follows up. That's been removed. I'm not sure why it's been removed. Let's read over his weapons and see what we got going on there. We got Throne Spear. So it is a Rat 6, range 10, rate of fire 1, POW 13, very damaging spear, I would say. Not only that, it has critical smite, so on a critical hit, the model hit is slammed D6 inches directly away from the model. If the model is larger based on the attacking model, it is rolled half distance, so a D3. Makes sense, because, you know, if he's throwing spears at large models, he's only a medium model, probably can't get the right amount of a swing on it. Then he has his battle spear, his melee weapon. It is a Mat 6, range 2, POW 13, which makes sense since his thrown weapon is also a POW 13. And it appears, here's one of the corrections or the updates from Mark 3 to Mark 4. They have removed powerful attack from this model. So he no longer can spend 1 fury point to boost all the attacks and damage rolls for this attack. Unfortunately, that probably got removed for a balancing situation, because that is a little OP'd of a thing. And then, of course, the thrown modifier for the strength plus power mess was removed, because now it's just a straight, you know, power on the weapon. There's no strength modifier in Mark 4. So that is out. And his Animus is still a Far Strike, which has been nerfed a little bit in Mark 4. So the spellcaster's ranged weapons gain snipe, Far Strike lasts 1 round. An attack with this weapon with snipe gains +3 range. Used to be +4 range, now it's +3. I'm not sure if that was more because they were trying to match it up to some other movement style, but having the ability to throw a range 3 on top of, well, at least his stuff, like if he wanted to, he can get his stuff up to a 13, which is basically almost a sniper rifle. So, and if you give this ability to, say, you know, other ranged warlocks in the Trollbloods army, that is even more very useful. So I can see him being a pretty utility piece that you want to keep in your army, especially if you're playing a ranged army, because even though it's not a gun, it's still some damage, and it's still some pretty significant damage, and him being able to give himself or the warlock, you know, additional range on their damage too, very useful. But let's move on. Alrighty, well, the final troll we're reading about, he's a little bit of an elemental troll, and you'll see why he's a little bit of an elemental troll, but I added him to this list just because he is technically like a full-blood troll. You'll see why in a moment. He is a Northkin, so we do not have that much information about him, but thank you to some online resources with Warmachine University, who, you know, provide me with a lot of information, usually, for the Mark III system, so we'll be reading off of that. I added him to the full-blood trolls just because, well, his armaments are very much full-blood, and he does have immunity to ice damage and frost and all that stuff, only because he is a Northkin, and I feel like every Northkin actually has immunity to that, so that actually just makes sense. But without further ado, let's read about the Troll Basher of the Northkin. Wielding enormous maces made from salvaged scrap metal, the ferocious Troll Basher is a favored warbeast of many Northkin. Troll Bashers are quick to anger and enjoy crushing their enemies before devouring them. Northkin warlocks often let their bashers run at the fore of the battle. Their wild swings can cause the greatest harm to massed enemy troops. And quick, simple, these guys are ginormous. These guys have some maces that are been scrapped together just to give them a little bit more punch rather than just eating them, you know, barehanded. So it makes these guys very dangerous. But what makes them even more dangerous is some of their immunity setups. So let's go over their Mark 3 to Mark 4 changes right now. And as always, we're going to start with their stat line. So their stat line includes a speed of 5, because no trolls are all that quick. They have a mat of 6, defense of 12, arm 16, so they're not very heavily armored compared to some other of the trollkins that we've seen. They have trample, they have immunity to frost, they have pathfinder, and they have headbutt, which makes them very useful. They have their abilities include regeneration, a D3. This model can be forced to heal D3 like every other troll that we've seen. And yeah, that is pretty simple, pretty basic. Looks like his weapon is a great mace. And with his great mace, it is a mat 6, range 1, POW 14. So this guy is very strong for a melee light warbeast, sorry. The abilities on here are beatback. So immediately after he takes a swing, he knocks the enemy back 1 inch, and then this model advances towards that model 1 inch, so he can move guys around the battlefield and keep them going. He also has critical stagger, so if you like to fish for crits, on a critical hit, the model hit loses its initial attacks and cannot make power attacks or special attacks for 1 round. So you send him in there to kind of knock out people's special abilities and knock out their initials. So you want him attacking Warbeast if you can get him up there. And what makes him more of an elemental that adds it in is he has Cold Front, so as his animus. And so Cold Front, the spellcaster gains Chiller for 1 round. While within 2 of a model with Chiller, enemy models without resistance to cold suffer -2 defense. So he can actually lower defenses of other models, making his mat 6 not that bad, because basically gets him up to a mat 8 with that negative. So he is very good at that. But as far as that, I wouldn't really consider that making him a full elemental, rather than just having a unique ability granted to him because he is a Northkin model. But yeah, but that will conclude the full blood trolls, and then next week we'll be going over all the dire trolls, or whenever we go over this again. Thank you guys so much for checking in the class. Please, if you could, like, subscribe, let me know how you're enjoying it, comment. That's always very useful. Please share it with your friends and fellow gamers. That helps spread the channel and helps keep all this fantastic lore going. And another thank you to privateerpress for letting us read your fantastic lore. And as always, class dismissed.